Welcome. Thank you for joining us for a fireside chat with Martin Balluch. Before we begin, I just have a few brief practical remarks that we're not supposed to be standing in the corridor, so if there are any late arrivals, you people over here, please gently nudge them to find their seats, and everyone else just make it easy for people to squeeze in. And the other thing is there will be a Q&A session at the end of the conversation, and if you have any questions, just submit them in the inventory app. And if you see other questions in there that you really like, you can upvote those, and they're more likely to be answered. And then I will introduce the host of the conversation. Mahi Klosterhalfen is the CEO and president of the Schweitzer Foundation and has dedicated himself to animal advocacy since his student days. After completing his studies in business administration, he became the first full-time employee in the Schweitzer Foundation and set about expanding the foundation, which today employs 40 people in 2 countries. Mahi Klosterhalfen maintains numerous valuable contacts with a range of international animal welfare and animal rights movements. His work is inspired, above all, by Mahatma Gandhi, the late Henry Spira, and Albert Schweitzer. And with that, I give the microphone.
Thank you very much, Christopher. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thanks for the warm welcome. And we have a very special guest today here, Martin Balluch. And Martin Balluch has been an activist since 1984, so over 40 years of experience that we want to dig into today. And a lot has happened in these 40 years, to say the least. You are best known as the leader of VGT, Verein gegen Tierfabriken, in Austria. But there is a lot more to know about you, from your radical, or should I say, extreme days of early activism, to fleeing a country because of that, to being spied on by the police, facing serious jail time before being proven innocent, taking over a political party, maybe we can talk about that too, almost dying several times, actually. I think the chances of us being here are lower than 10%. And Martin also co-founded the Vegan Society of Austria. He holds a PhD in physics, actually worked with Stephen Hawking in Cambridge. He holds a PhD in philosophy and wrote several books on animal rights and activism. Peter Singer called him one of the foremost spokesmen in the worldwide animal rights movement for pursuing the non-violent democratic road to reform. And since we are touching on Peter Singer, Martin is also a holder of the Peter Singer Prize for effective work to reduce animal suffering. A lot more can be said about him, but we want to hear from the man himself, and I'm sure we all are sufficiently intimidated by now. So I'll stop the introduction here. Martin, is there anything critically people should know about you before we dive into questions?
Almost sounds like an illness. No, I hope everything's fine.
I hope so too. Do you think they're spicier today, or is that a thing of the past?
As long as nobody's starting genetically engineering wild animals so that they don't bite others, I will be constructive.
Okay, we'll touch on that maybe too. Wild animal suffering, very controversial debates you're having on that topic. But before we jump into today's big questions in animal activism, I want to start with your very early activism. You were an environmental activist before you became an animal rights activist, and you were an activist before there were really any NGOs in Austria. Can you take us back in time a little bit? Maybe tell us about the first campaign you ran, the tactics you used, how everything worked out, what the reactions were?
Yeah, that's a long story, long time ago. When I started in the 1970s for environment, there was no animal rights idea. It was before Tom Reagan wrote his book, and was just about when Peter Singer had written his. And the talk was about ecological ethics. What I did was, with 13, I joined the demo against the nuclear power station, and found it very embarrassing. And then, which I still do to some extent today, being on demos. But and then in 1984, that's for me the decisive moment when lots of people got together to protect the primeval forest that was supposed to be cut and made into a water power plant. And there, about 10,000 people were there to protect this forest, and we eventually won this campaign. And I stayed for a month in there. It was winter, there was snow, and we stayed in tents and occupied the trees and protected them. And it felt like now it's the new age is coming. There is a new green awareness, and from now on we will change the world.
And you told us that police was there, obviously, and that was very different compared to today. Maybe you can talk about that a little bit.
Yes, these police then, at least in Austria, were not at all used to demos. They were not in riot gear. They didn't exist. They didn't have helmets. They didn't have pepper spray. They didn't have shields. They were just sort of the normal Bobby on the street sort of thing. And and they still beat us. They went into the forest and tried to drive us out with violence. But what happened was that the public sort of got really enraged about this. And considering how many people protest today about issues, when we were attacked on the 14th of December 1984, that was the decisive attack by the police. There was 1,000 police officers swarming into this forest and hitting everybody they met. There was a spontaneous demo in the city center of Vienna with 40,000 people taking part of it. And it was really amazing, and the government was shocked. And today this is now a national park and protected. And when the entrance at the park, there's a little sign saying, thanks to those people who occupied it in the 1984 battles, because otherwise there wouldn't be a forest here.
So it sounds like you're both a national hero and a national enemy.
I was one of 10,000 heroes.
All right. But you won, and that's, at least for me, that kind of, I also started out with a much smaller campaign, but it was a success, and I got the feeling of like being addicted to being able to create some change. Did you have anything similar?
I was then very excited that it worked. I thought it is possible to mobilize lots of people on this issue. But I realized in these campfires in the winter night in the forests that there are people there for different reasons. There were some people there to protect democracy because they felt most people don't want this cut and they were ignored. There were some people there to protect species, like the species extinction. Some people were there to protect the forest as an ecosystem. And I was at least also there to protect the specific individual animals that we saw running around. And at the fireplace, we realized that some people feel the same like me. And so there and then we started an animal rights group.
That was then. So it was before you went to the UK that you got involved in animal rights?
Yes, okay. Quite a bit before.
Okay, so I think in the interest of time, we have to kind of fast forward a little bit to your times in the UK. I assume you went there for your academic work?
That is true, yes. I was a postdoctoral mathematician at the Applied Mathematics Institute of Stephen Hawking.
And you did that, and in your spare time, you did some very radical stuff. Can you talk about that?
Oh, yes. England was then really a very fertile ground for animal rights activism. There was a spirit of revolution. You had the impression that tomorrow, this all ending, at least when you were in your bubble and before social media. And the people were very determined, to say the least. And there were so many groups. Like I immediately joined Hunt Sabotage because I've always been very attached to nature and to the wilderness. And so anti-hunting is something that's close to my heart. And so I went into the council of HSA, which is the oldest, possibly of the new wave, oldest animal rights organization. And And I went out twice a week sabbing hunts. And if you imagine that now, there were about 150 groups, and they're all going out every week to sabotage hunters. That's an amazing amount of people, an amazing amount of pressure on hunting. And that obviously led to a lot of conflict. Let me mention one, the Battle of Stacton Cross, as it was called. There was the hunt people in the southeast of East Anglia started to enroll violent thugs that they would actually pay to attack us, or at least the Sabs that were there. And because of that, they called for help. And so from all of the country, about 250 Sabs went there and beat them badly, to be honest, and attacked them and smashed their cars up. And this was the typical animal rights activity of those days. They were not just messing about, going there and beating them without saying a word. And this was the first time I was arrested and then put in jail for a while. But they didn't hassle anyone anymore.
Wow. So you told me back in the days you were sort of an abolitionist. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, obviously this was a very strong grassroots movement. People did this out of idealism and not. There were no NGOs that would pay that kind of activity. There were NGOs like the RSPCA that was sort of the enemy. They were sort of cooperating with the enemy. They were having lots of money and seemed to be not investing it in anything that would lead to abolition. So yes, there was a strong mood against national NGOs. I was never very hyped up about this, but I was, yes, in an environment of abolitionists who felt like any compromise, any debate even, was going too far.
Wow. And I think it's fair to say you got the vibe that you were not welcome in the country anymore, and that led to you leaving or fleeing. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, I got a lot of conflict with the law. One was that I got convicted of damaging something to do with hunters, and they started to try to deport me. Stephen Hawking supported me. He wrote a letter to the interim minister and said, "You shouldn't deport this guy, we need him in mathematics." He said, "I disagree with him on animal rights, but..." Yes, but the decisive actions were, I mean, they introduced this Criminal Justice Act, which said you cannot sab, i.e. go on some private land and prevent some legal activity. So I was the first one who was in court for this, because I was a very enthusiastic saboteur, I have to say. And yes, and I got arrested during a very wild demo, liberating dogs from a dog breeder. And then I got arrested from liberating in the night cats from a cat breeder for vivisection. And then I had a trial date, and I thought better skip it.
Skip the trial date. Have you tried to go back since then, or?
Nah, rather not. I've heard that they don't just drop cases that are actually running, so okay. I might as well be arrested if I go there. Could well be, yes.
So if any UK authorities are watching or listening, Martin is a changed man now. He actually, he told me he overcame abolitionism, actually. Can you talk about that a little bit?
I would never, ever liberate cats anymore. No. Yes, I mean, when I came to Austria, there was also a very wild atmosphere, but in a much smaller scale. We also started sabbing, like following the ideas of the British movement, but also on a smaller scale. But the first thing that happened was it was a pheasant shoot. It was the very first hunt sab in Austria that I know of. And the hunter just shot an activist in the belly and said, "I thought he is a pheasant." And I learned then that police and courts ignore that if there's violence against you, if you're doing sabbing or some civil disobedience. But there was a wild days. It was, yeah, one has to admit, there was a lot of ALF activity. There was cat hunting platforms, smashed up windows of fur shops, and liberation of fur animals, liberation of pigs and destruction of pig factory farms. There were actually also 9 arson attacks in these days, late 90s. But then suddenly we managed to get a ban on fur farming in 1998. And I was surprised, everyone was surprised, that it was actually reasonably easy. And then it dawned on people, it's not necessary to actually damage something, you just ban it. And so we started running campaigns for bans, and it turns out it works. So we had the ban on fur farming, we had the ban on wild animals in circuses, we had the ban on battery farms, we had the ban on great ape experiments, we had the ban on caging rabbits, and it ran on.
So those were, I would say you really changed or were part of a change of how activism was approached, and you just talked about that. Would you say there's anything we can learn for today's activism from this change and how you started to approach things differently?
I mean, what happened to the English movement then, and also to some others, is that there was a huge crackdown of the state. They didn't mess about. So it took a while so that they got in action, but then they put a lot of spies into the English movement. They had a specific police, it was called Army, that was chasing animal rights activists only. That was their professional job. And this crackdown led to a lot of arrests and a lot of long prison sentences. Actually, today you would think this is the same sort of movement. Actually, it's last century, so maybe it's a long time ago. But then there were 1,000 people in prison altogether in the English movement. 1,000 people, were 1,000 activists on a demo, and 1,000 activists were going so far as to breach the law that they would be locked up in jail. So this was a very, very strong movement and very spirited, but the way they approached it led to this crackdown, and actually to quite a long time of complete silence in my experience. So the mistake they made, or we made, was that we completely didn't care about the sympathy of the public, like what Jan said today about this fair approach. Obviously, the public didn't think it was fair the way the movement acted, and so they applauded the system locking people up. And so what I learned from that is the most important thing in activism is that you have the sympathy of the public. The public must be behind you in all those things you do. Then you're on the one hand protected to some extent against repression, and on the other hand successful because they support your initiatives and campaigns. So the sympathy of the public is a decisive point. I call it the tipping point in my talks on campaigning. So like if there is radicalism in one axis and effectivity by shaking the status quo, then it increases with more radicality until there's the tipping point when it completely drops. Like being more radical than that loses the sympathy of the public and the effect goes to zero. So you have to feel where this tipping point is, and the ideal campaign means shifting that tipping point, so the place how far you can go, to ever more radicality and ride the wave, sit up there so that you have the sympathy of the public, but you shake the boat as much as possible so that eventually it comes to a compromise or the powers that be are willing to negotiate.
And we could talk more about that. Unfortunately, we have to move on. But if you want to learn more about that, I think Googling the Balluch curve is what people could do, and then find out more about the tipping point and the whole theory behind it. What we've heard from you is that you had still have a very broad approach of injustices towards animals you're fighting against. And this starts, you mentioned it, with helping apes who are the victims of experiments, and goes all the way to what effective altruists would today agree with, going after hens in cages. But you certainly don't seem to be an effective altruist, and maybe we can talk about that a little bit. Like, what are your philosophical differences?
Yeah, if I speak about the philosophy, then I would say that values come into being in this world by conscious beings valuing something good or bad. Values are not objective, so you have something to claim there is an objective bad that's being suffering is just not rationally possible, because there is no objective being that can do, so general being that can do objective values. So the central point is not suffering, but the central point is the decision of each and every conscious being themselves. You must listen to them, what they want, and try to respect it as much as you can. And that's a very big difference, because you don't add up suffering and add up joy and subtract it from each other or whatever, which you actually can't ever do in reality. But you have to look for the autonomy of each being and say, try to give them as much space as possible for being autonomous. And in our society, that means giving them basic rights, and especially rights against being possibly on a utilitarian calculation being used in some way or other. Because a merely utilitarian calculation could mean that in order to avoid the general suffering, you should suffer now. It's easily possible, like if you do vivisection and believe it works, say on a human, then why not make this one human suffer and you develop a cure for millions of others? A utilitarian would have to agree that this is something you have to do. But in my view, this is not respecting the will of this individual being, and this being's wish is as important as anyone else's. So you should respect that and give it the right not to be used, even if that means avoiding suffering for many others.
Thank you. I think there's a lot to unpack here. Maybe start with, I think, your view on helping, for instance, apes and experiments. You have a view that this can trickle down to all kinds of defeating all kinds of oppression towards animals, that one thing leads to another. Can you expand on that a little bit?
I briefly tell the story of this campaign. In 1976, pharmaceutical companies started doing experiments on apes against hepatitis and AIDS. And they got apes from American companies or vivisection labs, and then they bought wild-caught apes from Sierra Leone in West Africa. And these beings were brought in as babies, and they shot all the adults. And so they accumulated more than 60 apes in this lab, which was terrible. Tiny, small cages where you couldn't even stand properly. And one of those apes got confiscated at the border because there weren't the papers right. And eventually it was supposed to be given back to the vivisection lab, but we prevented that. The Supreme Court had ruled it has to be given back, but 200 people, 200 activists sat in front of it and didn't allow the police and the vivisection lab to take him. And so I got to know him well. I played with him a lot of things. It was quite a good friendship with this chimp, and I obviously realized how dreadful it is what happens to the others. And we got an undercover investigator into this lab. We got pictures from how they were kept there in 4 square meter cages underneath the ground, so in a cellar, and were injected with all sorts of things. And in the 2000s, we managed to make this company stop, and in 2006 we achieved the ban on it. But on top of that, I wanted this chimp, that was my friend, to sue the government and this vivisection lab for his fate, because he was obviously mistreated and lost all his life by this, and his parents. But suing can only a person, a legal person, and in Austria, obviously, the chimp might not be one. So I started procedures trying to get him to be recognized as a person without changing the law, actually. I don't know what that is called in English, but something like a legal guardian. That if there's a human who is accepted as a person but is not capable of doing their own business, then they get a guardian. And I argued I want to be the guardian of this chimp and in his name sue the government and this vivisection lab. And what happened then was that the judge in the first instance said, but he's an ape. And I said, no, he's a person. If you look at the law, you can conclude it. We had 4 expert statements by university professors who agreed to that. And then she ruled against it by saying he doesn't have papers and he is actually not handicapped, so he doesn't need a legal guardian. And I brought this all the way to the European Court of Human Rights. But my primary point is that if he was recognized as a person, then you could do a lot of different things, like suing the government, like preventing him to be sold by his owner, like giving donations to him so that he himself can buy his own place where he lives. And that makes the difference. And so for me, that was the primary goal of all this campaign on this behalf, to achieve personhood for non-humans, so that that would open the door to completely new way of looking at it or protecting non-humans.
So there are a lot of people here who mainly focus on ending factory farming. And what would you tell them? Why would that be an important intervention to help one individual and to invest so much time and energy and money into helping one individual instead of a million hens or broiler chickens or pigs?
Yeah, firstly, because I'm not a utilitarian, so I don't look at the number of suffering. I want to achieve rights, and to achieve personhood for an ape is a huge step towards rights. Because with personhood, as a person, you can have subjective rights. If you're not accepted a person, you can't. And the idea is obviously to extend this personhood, if it had been achieved for him, to other beings as well. And eventually extend it to all. And obviously, the more economically valuable the usage of those beings is, the harder it would be to get a personhood for them. So you start out with beings where there is actually no costs involved, apart from the damages he would have got from the state if he had sued them for mistreating him that way. But the time wasn't ripe then. It's 20 years ago. Maybe we should try it again.
So the counter-argument would probably be, even if we were to succeed in that, which is still a big question mark, is it mostly theory and hope that it will trickle down to other animals? Or are you, like, how sure are you that we can get from apes to chickens at some point?
No, I mean, first you breach this species barrier, and I think that's very important, because then nobody can say, but he is an animal, or she, or it, as some people say, is an animal. So if you can't say that anymore, but there has to be a debate, and debate is what makes a person to be a person legally. So what do they have to be able to do? I mean, I said in this trial, if you put this person behind a screen, you don't know him or her, and then you ask questions about him or her, and you get the answers, can you decide from that if this is a person or not? Or do you have to sort of look at him, and if he has fur all over, he must be a thing? And and if you breach that barrier, then the debate opens on what makes a person. And I think you can extend it from apes to chimpanzees, to other apes. You can extend it to elephants and dolphins probably quite easily. And then it goes further, and there's a lot of research on cognitive abilities. If you read up, like the Clever Pig Lab in Austria that investigated cognitive abilities of pigs, then you're sort of surprised. They recognize themselves in a mirror, they can trick others, they understand motivations and intentions in others, they have these mirror neurons that they can feel with others and feel empathy. All these things they are capable of, and I'd say that makes them a person. So I think the door would be open in this direction.
I think it's probably pretty easy to convince us of that. I just wonder if the general public, how open they would be, or if it's like a lost cause to try to do it. But Probably we could debate that for a long time, and we have a lot more topics to touch on. One thing I wanted to ask you about is your style seems to be very confrontational. And today, Jan Sorgenfrey talked about having different role, like a fair cop, not only a bad cop is needed. To put it in my words, I always tell my team and also sometimes the public and the companies we work with, my approach is to be as friendly as possible. So I always start out with an ask and make a case, try to explain why it has some advantages to, for instance, have higher welfare standards. And that doesn't seem to be your style at all, is it? And why not?
Well, I'd say I'm a very fair bad cop. I mean, I've written a book on this, actually, called Resistance Within Democracy. I didn't call it fair, I called it democratically legitimate, which is also not the same as legal. But there are illegal things that are democratically legitimate and legal things that are not democratically legitimate. It's a bit similar, although it's based on a sort of a different kind of thinking. But we don't just out of the blue run into some shop and scream around. We do build it up, like I said, with this curve of effectivity and the tipping point. So in many things, I recognize our campaigning style in what Jan said. When we start out with relatively mild activity, nobody talks with me, so I can't go like you and talk with somebody because they say, bugger off. So I accept that already, so that's our image. But it can be helpful. But, you know, we build it up, we ever more confrontational and more confrontational, shift the tipping point, stay on the side of sympathy of the public, see how far we can go with not losing the sympathy of the public and go as far as possible. So be as aggressive and as confrontational as the public can stomach. And my experience is, if you do that, then and if you really bite into your enemy, into your political opponent, you know, you just don't let go. I keep saying quantity over quality in this campaigning style. We want to do everyday demo. Every day we are there. Every day we chase these people up and question them. And like before we achieved the ban on the sow stalls and the farrowing crates, we had 35 press conferences of the agricultural minister that we stopped. We just ran there and held banners in front of him, screamed, swarmed it, and you know, we chased him up, well, her later, and eventually achieved it because they felt we didn't lose the sympathy of the public. The public understood that we are going as far as that because it was such a big, major issue, and they didn't react. So eventually, you know, when they write to me and say, let's talk, then I know that this is the point where we will be achieving something. Before that, they don't talk to me.
I think that there is some potential for synergies. I remember a story in my early days of activism. I started out with getting universities to go cage-free in their dining operations. And after having some success in Germany, I met some of your colleagues and I was like, what's the situation like in Austria? And they said, well, we actually only have one company running all the restaurants of the universities, all the canteens. But this guy, this one decision maker, he really hates us and we don't get along. So I picked up the phone and like I said, hey, can we talk about laying hens in cages? He like freaked out. He was like, you are one of these radicals and I don't want anything to do with you guys and you just trying to destroy my life and all of that.
Welcome in Austria.
I think you lacked a good cop, maybe. I took on that role and I was like, hey, sorry, there must be a misunderstanding. Actually, I'm just trying to be very supportive here and want to find out what's stopping you from doing that, and maybe we can work together. I've worked with some German universities, and then he kind of started listening and we talked for a little bit, and after a while, he was like, okay, let me look into this. And actually, after a while, then he said, okay, we're doing it. We're going cage-free. So there's a point to be made, I guess, that maybe not you, but maybe in the ecosystem, which also Jan talked about, and maybe that just lacked in Austria, some even more good cop approaches can be a good synergy. What do you think?
Yeah, what I don't know. We are, as VGT, or Association Against Animal Factories, are pretty dominant when it comes to activism in Austria. So most people who want to be active join us. We are right across the country in many different groups. And we're running these federal campaigns with a specific target, and we all cooperate in this. So if you are an animal rights person in Austria, it's not completely true, but if you are, then and if you approach such a person, then they would immediately try to link that with us and our image. So yeah, maybe if there was a group that was completely detached from us and they would sort of believe that and accept that, they could build up some constructive discussion and debate. Would find that good. The only problem I see is that that if there isn't the pressure from us, I can't see why anybody would adopt their behavior or become more animal friendly. And for that, we need to cooperate very intensely, because if there's one person doing these negotiations and we haven't got a clue about this because they have their own fundraising and their own group and they actually totally detached from us, then I think this is a campaign that is not as well running as the campaigns we did. So yeah, it would have to be a cooperation underneath the surface, a very close one.
Yeah, yeah. And actually, I think you don't even have to fake it. I think, like, being open about that, you talk to all groups who do animal protection work, animal rights work. I think the companies or politicians, they can guess that anyway. Yeah, I mean, I think being like very straightforward about what you do can also be an approach. And for us, it has worked quite well so far.
Yeah, we're very transparent that if you don't do that and that, then you will get in trouble with us. Yeah. We're very transparent about this, but yeah, you know, I'm not the sort of person who fits into their cliques. Also, I don't know. I'm not dressing up like a business person. They don't recognize me as one of them. I don't pretend. I'm as authentic as there is, and yeah, I'll go with sandals into Parliament. And if you don't like it, don't like it. I don't hide this. I don't want to bend myself. This is what drives activism. I think if I was to bend myself all the time and be populist in order to have sympathy and achieve something, I would burn out immediately, because that doesn't fulfill me at all.
Yeah, and I think it goes to show that there's room in the movement for many different types of people and different approaches, and they can work very well together. I remember I once convinced you to buy nice shoes, and then you wore them for a while, and then you stopped wearing them.
They are collecting dust somewhere in my cupboard, yes.
I'll take them.
God, I can tell you sandals are the best.
Okay, so there was too much bending, the nice shoes. But again, like I couldn't do the Martin Balluch style. Like I couldn't be as confrontational as you are. So as I said, it goes to show there's room in this movement for many different approaches and different types of people. So I think that's a positive.
As long as we don't infight and argue and say, well, how do you look like?
Yeah,
that's we achieve it.
So I think it's fair to say maybe you were too effective in your activism. You made a lot of enemies, also being Martin Balluch, being very confrontational. The circus people hated you, or still do, the vivisectionists, the factory farmers, the hunters. And some of those people are very influential, and they have ties to the government and ties to the police, and so much so that there was an actual conspiracy that was plotted against you and other activists. And the claim was that you together formed a criminal organization. And before we dive into what happened, looking back, were there any signs of something brewing up?
the strange thing is, they were a bit too late. We were wild in the late 90s, and they came 10 years later, which is surprising to us. There was actually nothing happening that you could possibly pinpoint it on. And so it was actually politically driven, yes. We had these successes, and that is what made them react like this. How did we feel it beforehand? We did. Suddenly, a number of strange things happened, like we did get bans on doing a demo. I mean, considering we are in a liberal democracy, that the government of one province says, in our province, you cannot, in principle, do a demo for animals. I mean, isn't that strange? We went eventually to the Constitutional Court, and in their first ruling, they said, yeah, there's no law that is wrong. They just misread the law. And in the second instance, they said, okay, with the law, it doesn't work. So eventually, we got the possibility to protest again, but it took years. It took years. And we did demo, and we got arrested and all these things. But I mean, we had this big trouble. In Vienna, they didn't allow us to do demos outside fur-selling shops. And this is also the big fur companies. And the Minister of the Interior, so the head of police, essentially did a press conference where they said, VGD is a violent organization. And I tried to sue him for this, and it turns out you can't sue ministers for libel because they are sort of protected against this. So we felt there's something weird going on, but we felt so innocent. We just ran campaigns like with civil disobedience. There was nothing criminal happening. So we thought in a country like Austria, it must be safe. And we were bloody wrong.
Yeah, I mean, shit started to hit the fan, to say the least. Maybe can you walk us through, I think we have to break this into individual parts. Walk us through what happened until you found yourself in jail.
Yeah, as it turns out, the state prosecutor of some strange little town that had nothing to do with animal rights and nothing ever happened there, started a prosecution on the basis of criminal organization. And if you do this, you have a lot of ways of infiltrate this this group that supposedly is responsible. And so they got a special commission of 35 professional police persons whose only job was to get us in jail and destroy the VGT. They put 2 spies into our group, one long-term spy, 19 months, the other 6 months. They didn't know of each other, so they spied on each other a bit as well. And one was I learned that that's the case. One was a professional spy. She was a policewoman who had done a special training in spying. And she then got, by the government, a different name and a passport, and she rented a room that she actually never lived in, but she could pretend to be there, so that she faked her personality altogether. And the other spy was herself. She was recruited from prison. They dropped her prison time, where if she was spying on us and actually reporting to the police every day. She went into our office and said, "Can I work here?" And I said, "No." And then she said, "Okay, I stay anyway and do voluntary work." And then she sat all the time in our office. You are open, so you allow this to happen. She got an account with our office address, and she listened to everything people said in the office. So, yes, and there was lots of things. There were the police started observing people, so they ran 5 months. They followed me wherever I went, without me realizing, I have to say. They put the GPS tracker on my car and on another person's car. They had 12 cameras above doors to film who is going in and out. They listened in to telephone calls of a number of people, also months on end, with a person live listening to what's being said. And they also watched accounts moving up and down if there is money going in, and they read emails as much as they could. And eventually, then, on the 21st of May 2008, they came in the night and raided 33 homes and offices of animal activists, including everywhere where I possibly could be, at my brother's, at my place, at a friend's place, at the office, and took everything away from me. Till today, I haven't got my laptop back. All the pictures that I've taken privately till 10 are gone. Yes, and then they put me in prison.
And they actually like broke into your homes and like
Yes.
pulled you out and
they
threw
didn't
you.
knock on the door and say hello.
Yeah.
No, they came with a ram and they broke the door in the night. They came with flashlights and pulled guns. They put the gun on my head. I was naked in the bed and they pulled me out by my hair, pulled me on the wall, put the gun on my head, and then started ransacking the place for 6 hours, and then took me with them. And also the office was raided by police. They came with lorries and carried everything away and actually never gave it back until we had court proceedings to get it back. They also took away all our membership database. We couldn't contact the members. We couldn't get in the donations. All the legal cases for animal abuse that we had, we completely lost because they took all the evidence away. All cameras, all computers, everything that was movable in this office was gone. So this was a clear try to get us actually completely destroyed.
And you found yourself in jail, not really knowing why you're in jail. You were not told why, and there was no trial for a while, and you went on a hunger strike?
That is true, yes. I was in jail. I was firstly isolated, so I couldn't even speak to a lawyer and don't know what happened at all. And nobody would tell me. And yes, I sat in jail and I said, if the last autonomous thing I can do is go on hunger strike, because what you're doing is obviously illegal. Eventually they came with, eventually just before charging me, actually, they came with the report on me, which was some 600 pages. And everything was radical emails that they read somewhere or heard somewhere or seen somewhere, some 18 years old in Britain, which then was quite radical from the content. But it is a different time and place, so you can't use that against me then. But they didn't have, even with all those spies and following me and everything, they didn't have any criminal thing that I could possibly have done to pin on me, so they just pinned on me radical emails where I say, wow, this company is such an asshole, somebody should smash them up or something. These sentences, without anyone doing it, was used against me to prove that I'm a criminal. They actually brought 26 charges, and one of them was my PhD in philosophy. They called it dangerous thoughts. And they said, if somebody's writing this, that must be because he wants to recruit people for doing criminal things. I mean, essentially they said our criminal organization is there to coerce politicians and companies to become animal friendly. And I think, what a crime! What a crime! And another charge was that I supposedly had bribed a judge. This is just a joke. I mean, if you read all these things that happened, you can laugh now, but then I sit in prison and don't know anything. I supposedly had bribed a judge because I was doing, not me, hand-sabbing. And there were cars there, and they wrote down the number plates, and they gave fines to all those people who own these cars. And we brought that to court, saying, no, those people who own these cars weren't actually driving them, and those were actually just stopping to have a piss, but they have nothing to do with hand-sabbing. And the judge ruled that this is right. You can't prove that they actually sabbed, so dropped all the cases. And I privately said, while they listened to me, wow, what a super judge. The way she acts, we can safely do hand-sabbing. And that they concluded I must have bribed her. And they raided twice her home. They listened into her phone, and they tried to pin a contact from me to her, which never existed, and tried to make this whole up into, look, this criminal organization is even bribing judges. So, and that's just one example of many. Just briefly, another one. We go into school since 1995 in Austria to teach children on animal issues and moral issues. And they interviewed children after we have been there, 7-year-olds, and say, what did they say? Did they recruit you? And then it was a charge saying they recruiting children in schools for the criminal organization. I mean, unbelievable. Well, this is the way it went to court with.
And the law they used to do all this was kind of put in place to crack down like mafia clans and like really criminal organizations. So give the police a lot of freedom to do all this stuff. And so the idea was, okay, you're a criminal organization, we can do this to you as well.
Let me say about the hunger strike. You asked. I went on a hunger strike, and I went on it for 39 days, which is close to the end. I was, after the 25th day, they put me in the hospital wing of the prison system. And and eventually I just dropped it because they claimed to the outside world I'm eating anyway. They diluted it completely, which is I hear they usually do. And I found I wasn't capable anymore of defending myself, because you have ever so often a court date where they discuss if you're kept in prison or not. And I was in there for 105 days, but after 39 days, I decided I want to defend myself. So I started eating again. But then I realized after 39 days not eating, you can't eat. You can't eat. I ate some tiny little spoon of some soya porridge, and I was totally full, and I said, I can't eat anymore. And so it took me 2 weeks to be able to eat even a tiny bit of food. And so I realized how deep you get into this when you do a hunger strike. This is a very, very exerting thing on your body while you don't actually feel it. You're a bit on a high level. You sort of feel everything is quite funny and nice. And so it didn't help, to be honest.
So we don't have a lot of time to go through the trial, but to say the least, the trial seemed to be like totally staged against you. All this like fake evidence was presented. The judge seemed to buy everything, and it seemed to be you were like on a very clear path to ending up in prison for a very, very long time. And then you yourself, like you and your friends and colleagues, started to dig up some evidence that swayed the whole thing. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, briefly. The point is, 12 of, or was it 13 of us were charged and sitting eventually in the courtroom 14 months. A huge trial. They listened to 126 witnesses against us. They dug out every person we ever had some campaign against. The last fur farmers, they took out of their grave and put them there as witnesses. All these battery farmers that we had sort of managed to have to close their business by changing the law. And vivisectors, circus people, and they all sat there and said, God, they're such a nuisance. They always hassled us. It was so terrible. This is the evidence there was, not of crimes, but of this sort of harassment due to demos and run-ins and actions of that kind. Yes, I actually had 14 experts that I had to pay to do some statements in our defense. 14 months on trial means you're constantly thinking about it, you're defending yourself, you're getting things together, like having to stop all animal rights activity, really. And most of the people who were charged with me and sitting in court there actually couldn't bear it anymore and stopped sort of defending themselves. And what really made the difference was that I found evidence of these spies that the police had denied to exist. And they had literally said in court there was no spy, so they lied in court. And I found evidence of that, and I paid a detective, which is expensive. And this detective then uncovered one spy, and another detective uncovered the other spy. And so we called them as witnesses. And they sat there and said, there was nothing criminal. 19 months I spent with them as a policewoman, and there was nothing criminal. You know, I went with her 3 times, I think, in the night into a battery farm to film the hens. She felt it wasn't criminal. I was in the city center in the night, placarding, so wild posting. And she said it's not criminal. And then she was asked by me, so I'm supposedly a militant activist. Do you think I'm militant? And she said, yes. And I said, why? And then she said, yeah, once we were sabbing a hunt and it was raining and you still got out of the car to prevent the hunters from shooting. And that's militant.
Sure, makes sense. If you get wet doing activism, that makes you very militant. So the judge, we have, unfortunately, we could talk about this for hours, but we have to wrap this chapter up. The judge, like, it was very much against her own career plans, but it seems like morally, ethically, she could not do what she was expected to do, and that was put you into jail.
Yes, after these two statements, which took ages. So the one spy was there for a couple of weeks or 3 weeks as a witness in the stand all the time. She was in the back door wearing wigs and having a big nose in order not to be recognized. And the other spy was also questioned a couple of days. And after that, the judge wrapped up the case. I had a number of witnesses that I wanted to call in my defense, and she said, I don't need to hear them anymore, because if there's police amongst you for almost 2 years and there was nothing, although she was there all the time and there was nothing criminal, you're not a criminal organization. And she said, not guilty, proven innocence.
Yeah. So very lucky, and that added to the very small percentage of us having this conversation. As I said, we have to wrap this up, but very briefly, you mentioned you had to spend your own private money to get the out-of-jail card, basically. You've been ruined financially, others have been ruined financially, you sued for repairs to get some money back, it didn't work out, and that's still the case, right?
Yeah, yes, I had to sort of spend 600,000 euros, which I didn't have, obviously, in my defense. A lawyer costs 4,000 euro court day, and the government didn't give me money for this, for my defense. And they also didn't give me money for being innocently in prison, actually. So, yeah, I had to go privately. Bankrupt, exactly, was the only way to do this. I mean, I sued the state because they, on the basis that they did not say that they were spies, and the spies were conducive to stopping the whole trial. But the state paid the number of lawyers who went to the Supreme Court and said, we would have prosecuted him anyway if the spies were known. And so I lost that case, and then the state wrote to me, you have 2 weeks to pay 78,000 additional euro for your for our solicitors in this case. If you don't pay, then we will come and remove everything you own. And I asked for donations, and people donated within a week or so some 120,000 euros in my defense, which shows how much sympathy of the public I had behind me. And I could pay that, and I could pay about half the costs of the trial with donations. But then I had to give up.
There's obviously like a very dark chapter in the history of the animal protection movement and the oppression that happened. Do you think there are any lessons we can draw from everything that happened?
I mean, like that, it can never happen again, because we did also a campaign against this section of the criminal law. 278A was removed and changed so that it says a criminal organization is only one that wants to get rich. However, that is the direct translation. So political campaigners can never be prosecuted under this law again. Like we were, which I find very good, and I would also count as a good campaign result. Yeah, but I mean, you know, the first thing you learn is wherever you write it to, that can be held against you 20 years later in a court. This thing does never disappear. If you delete it, it's still there. You know, they had these experts who ransacked all the computers. We had PGP, and we had a lot of it encrypted, but they couldn't open that. But there was lots of tricks to get parts of the encrypted data. Like, for example, you write something, and before you encrypt it, it is being somehow saved somewhere. And they found remnants of this and could sort of construct this or that. Also, I had written from England, this is how these 18-year-old emails came up, to my father and to someone, and explained to them what we were doing, which was criminal. And then this person got it encrypted, but decrypted it and left it on his computer, and then police came 20 years later and took this computer out of the cellar, and there were still true remnants of this on it. So yeah, everything you write can be used against you. So nowadays, if I write something, I imagine myself sitting in front of this judge who says, "What did you mean with that?" And I must have a good excuse in order that this doesn't happen again like this. And then on the other hand, we don't want to be as naive again, like, okay, there are spies, so be careful in some way or other. Try to watch out for signs for spies. On the other hand, you can't close down and say nobody should come into our office again because there has been spies. So yeah, it's always a balance between closing off and being secretive, and on the other hand, being open to the public and allowing people to come in. And but what I must say, looking at it now, in May 2011, I was found not guilty. This is 14 years ago and a bit. I must say, looking back on these 14 years, that we haven't been so wild and so unbroken spirit again. Because when you do handsabbing or something, then it's always in the back of your mind, what if? And how do you, and can you escape it? And will you be in the police files? Will they come once and raid your home? So yes, they managed with violence, they managed to stop us from being so completely openly, radically active without being criminal, but civil disobedience, blockading and things. Yes, the spirit has been broken to some extent.
And I was going to ask you, and you touched on that, like, how is campaigning in Austria now changed for you? You also talked to me about how the industry evolved to your campaign tactics. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, I mean, we had a number of successes, rapid successes at the beginning, almost once a year. We could close one campaign. But then the crackdown came, this 3 years of repression, which stopped us in our tracks. There was no campaign in those days. It wasn't possible. It was a survival fight. And after that, we had campaigns again. There was this South campaign, which we won, but got a bit of dilution because it takes effect in 2033, which is ages still from today. And it has sort of slight exceptions. Then we won animal protection as a state goal in the constitution, but it was also diluted. They invented a state goal of animal production and of general, not vivisection, but basic research, meaning in brackets vivisection. We had our campaign against the worsening. They tried to worsen our successes in the broiler stocking density. They wanted to increase it, the allowed density, which we managed to prevent. But to run a campaign so that everything stays as it is, it's a hard time to celebrate afterwards. Yeah, we had also a campaign releasing game birds, which was also only partly successful. Half of Austria now has a ban on it, but the other half is still being able to do it with some reforms. And we ran a campaign on the slatted floor, which we won in July 2022, but was revoked this June, to my eternal shock. So yes, I think something has changed. The powers that be take us more seriously. They cooperate better. They directly, when they realize where's our campaigns going, they contact media and they pay advertisements so that they try to push out our stories. There's a number of tactics which I could go into more detail in order to prevent successful campaigns. So they've got their act together. First thing was smashers. When they didn't work, they still have this kind of intense cooperation, and they sue us all the time. I mean, during our campaign against hunting in enclosures, I had 36 trials against me, civil lawsuits per year, also in 1 year, 36, you know. It's obviously meant to sort of distract you and completely take you out of activity. At the moment, we have 7, I think, slap trials against us. Big bar retailer wants 100,000 euros for us because we said he's selling pork from slatted flooring, and they are co-responsible for this animal abuse, and they sue us for this. So yeah, this is surely because they cooperate, they tell each other what works, what doesn't work, they give each other information about activists and employees of our group. So yes, we have a much harder time now.
What had me and us in Germany was that Austria was often ahead of us when it came to banning battery cages. We could point to Austria and say it's already done in a different country, it works. And this kind of reminds me in Europe, and I think a lot of people here in the room work on the European chicken commitment, where we see quite some progress in several countries. Like in the Netherlands, they have basically completely switched. We see a lot of progress in Germany and France, some other countries. VGG doesn't seem to be too involved in that. Is there a specific reason for that?
I mean, when it comes to the stocking density, the law already is the EC level, or the chicken commitment level, CC. So the only thing is the fast breeding, and we have started campaign on this. But you know, our way of dealing is not have 20 campaigns at once, but we want to concentrate on one and bite into this and run it until we have one, and then we do the next one. So yes, at the sideline we do this in preparation of a possible future campaign, but we don't do it as our primary activity. We focus on one thing, and that's slatted flooring for pigs right now.
Okay, I hope you win that quickly, and then maybe you can join in on the fight.
We started 2019, so quickly doesn't look like it.
Yeah, okay.
But as Jan said, the image of us must be they win all campaigns, so just give up soon, which is why we won't give up. We will get stuck in this until we won it.
All right. I think we have to zoom out a little bit. There are some questions I wanted to ask you before we come to, I see we already have a lot of questions from the audience, and ask you about a couple of controversial views you hold. So zooming out of the day-to-day activism, being maybe a little bit more philosophical right now. And one topic I wanted to ask you about is intersectionality, and you've spoken out against it, and I don't know if I can make the best steelman argument, but the general idea is oppression is kind of a universal thing. It's happening in many areas. It happens to many different people and animals, and it should be targeted as a whole system of oppression. And you speak out against this. Why is that?
Yeah, I do think that we lose out on a number of people or movements if we sort of extend this to all topics. I'm all for preventing authoritarian regimes, like Martin today said, and that is because this is a destruction of democracy and therefore of our possibilities to be active. But I do think we need to be single issue as much as possible in order to win a case. If I run a campaign and demand more than slatted flooring, but also this and that as well, then it dilutes the pressure and you won't win the campaign. So my feeling is we have to not look left and right and do this and just concentrate on this topic alone. Apart from the authoritarian problem, because that is really one. Like in Austria, there's also the biggest party now is a very right-wing party which wants to put 2 years prison on occupying offices and 2 years prison of filming in factory farms. And since that is an activity that might be pinned on us, it is a survival question to prevent these right-wing people to go into government. So here I think we need to look right and stop them and cooperate, but otherwise stay on a single issue.
Okay. Then one topic you already mentioned in the beginning, where you're having public debates, that's on wild animal suffering. So in the effective altruism movement, there are several groups and people trying to prevent suffering of wild animals, and you think that's a bad idea?
Yeah, you know, if you hear suffering of wild animals, you think, and they say prevent it, and the first things they mention, you feel like, okay, that's cool. You know, if I walk in the woods and I see a bird that has been injured, a wild bird, then yeah, sure, take it and heal it or help it and release it again. Further, if there's a fire, I say, sure, go there and try to extinguish it and try to help animals. But what they are actually talking about, and rather keeping it not too much to the outside world, is that they want to design nature. They want to change the genetic makeup of beings in order to prevent suffering. They want to design a nature that is to 100% under human control in order to minimize suffering, and even concrete out grass meadows, because there are animals that might suffer. So you just put concrete there so that there is no animal anymore that and therefore cannot suffer. If I look at these kind of measures, then I think they're totally my enemy. I have started a foundation that has the goal to buy land, forest, and to rewild it, to make it as wild as possible, untouched by humans, no hunting, no agriculture, no forestry, and no tourism. To have an area where the wild animals can autonomously arrange their life by themselves. And that is, for me, the ultimate goal of animal liberation, that these animals are not under human control, but can do as they like. And this seems to be totally opposed to this animal, whatever it's called.
So you made it. You made it very clear that you're not a utilitarian, not your cup of tea. If you want to challenge Martin on any of that, use the app, please, and then you can vote on things. I think having an open debate here is what we want to do. And the last controversial thing before I come to your questions, please do check the app and vote for stuff. Going one step further, it's not only wild animals that effective altruism cares about, but also the potential suffering of artificial intelligence. And you say you have proof that this is not gonna happen. Talk about that, please.
God, yeah, if we worry about that now. I mean, artificial intelligence is software. And software, you can, instead of writing it on a computer, write it in a book. And you want to tell me that book can suffer? Also, in what sense? Okay, I have done a PhD in philosophy. And in there, I wrote the natural scientific argument for animal rights based on autonomy. And for that, I had to investigate a lot on consciousness, how it comes up and what it does and how you recognize it. And obviously, I can't now summarize. I argue mathematically, actually, with Kurt Gödel and his mathematical theorems, where I think one can prove, and this is not the time to extend all this, but I happily can do it. I think one can prove that consciousness is nothing that can be even 100% simulated, not talking about not being, by software in any way or form. It cannot, in principle. And this is a mathematic proof that I think you can't wish away. Mathematics is not a thing of I like it or I don't. It's a proof that has objective truth in it. And therefore, software can never be conscious and suffer.
Thank you. Again, if there are any people here who disagree, please let us know in the app. And I'll come to your questions from the audience. First one from Paul. Sorry for being the fair bad cop with the following question. Can you please, for the record, acknowledge that effective altruism has nothing to do with utilitarianism? Could you be a Kantian and an EA, or you could be both? So the question remains, why are you not an EA?
Okay. I can only say those people that I meet or speak to occasionally, who are effective altruists, are all utilitarian. I hear that some of them are not even animal rights minded, or animal, whatever it is, minded, animal utilitarian minded, or are vegan, but they all are utilitarian, have always argued on the basis of utilitarianism, and that even in a very simple way, where they mix eudaimonic pleasures with hedonistic pleasures. If you want to know what it is, you can Google it, and you will find that they are on very different areas in the brain, and the one is just superficial pleasure, and the other one is a deep sense in being, and as satisfaction based on this. And you can't mix them up because they're biological different things, and they have a very different effect on you. The one thing diminishes your immune system, the other one makes it better. So all these things, and a very long argument actually against utilitarianism stands. Yes, my experience, effective altruists are always utilitarian, but if somebody is not, I'm happy to talk about it and hear what makes this person effective altruist, if not utilitarianism.
All right, so you are approachable for any deeper philosophical debates. Heidi has a question, and she has the same observation I have. You have a lot of fire burning inside of you. So what's your best advice for everyone in this room to still be working for animal rights in 40 years, and how to keep that fire burning?
Oh, yeah, difficult. This guy in the morning said you must make friends with your activists, and that's surely a good idea, because then you, in your activism, you're in a good mood and feel supported. But you can't necessarily choose that, even if it's good. So for me, authenticity is one thing. Just you not pretend to be somebody else. You not put suit and tie on if you aren't a suit and tie person. And you do those kind of activities that you don't force yourself to do, but that comes naturally to you, that you feel comfortable doing because this is how you are. And for me, vital, absolutely vital. If I hadn't had that, I would long be gone from the movement, is going into the wild. I'm living actually in a cabin in the forest, which is 300 years old. The cabin, sadly not the forest. And I need to be there. I need to be out. I need to be in primeval forests, and I need to let this wildness, this sink in order to be able to come back to humans and face this campaign pressures.
I have the same, like going into nature I find very recharging. And if I may add, having objectives that are achievable and then actually achieving objectives every once in a while, for me at least, it really helps to keep the fire burning.
Yeah, completely agree.
Yeah. Easy, I hope I pronounce it correctly, asks, why does it not work anymore to simply ban animal abusing practices like concrete floor of pig farms in comparison to the achievements from the past, like the ban on fur farms, etc.?
Yeah, difficult question. I'd love to delve into and speak with people who have also long-term experiences. The one thing might be that the political opposition then was not as organized, so that they were a bit surprised by our activities. Another thing is that these targets were smaller. It is true that battery farming is an industry that is much smaller than pork production, at least in Austria. Huge difference. We had 1,700 about battery farms, but we have 20,000 or 30,000 pork farms. And they are much better with their contacts to politics. They have much more money, and they are much more present in media. So the target is getting harder. But then I also question if the way we are organized since after this trial and all the fear it created, maybe that hinders our effectiveness as well to some extent, that we are not willing to sort of completely go in and do the civil disobedience things. I mean, having said that, I want to make clear that we still do civil disobedience. It's not that we stop doing this. We go into hunts, we do investigations, we're going blockading offices, we run into press conferences, we still do that. And actually, in the end of last year, I was in a pig factory, sort of as an meet the victims type of action with other people and call the police myself and report it. I will be on trial for it in 2 weeks' time. So yes, we're still doing this. But I'm a bit missing the spirit. I'm a bit missing this attitude. Never mind if I go to prison, you know, I want to do this. I put everything into it. I'm missing that a bit, and might well have to do with this repression, but also with getting bigger and employing people who might not be as powered up, as fired up as they used to be.
Thank you. Again, I hope I pronounced that right. Maulik has philosophical question, long sentences. I understand your reasoning for value not being in an abstract concept like suffering, but then how do you go from this to knowing the individual's interests? Does it involve the universal category of the being or teleology in understanding them? Because suffering could come into the picture again in this, even if it's not as an abstract?
I don't think suffering is abstract. Suffering is the first idea of what a being might want, not to suffer anymore. But it's not the whole story. People or beings generally might take suffering into account to achieve something else or to have sense in their life. Like when you do animal rights activity, you suffer, but you have this eudaimonic pleasure, which is a bad word for it, but you find sense in it, and you find this suffering is worth doing because there's something becoming better in the world. So what you have to do is listen to creatures, thinking about wild animals now, see what they do, see what they like, see how they behave, and conclude from that, do they want to live undisturbed by humans in the wild, or do they want to have a benevolent dictatorship of humans that tell them what to do in order to prevent their suffering? And in my view, that works to quite a large extent, and you can see what animals want, wild, farmed, or at home, and you can conclude, in ever so often in cases, that there are many things they find more important. One of them is freedom, than prevent suffering. One example, so many fur animals are kept in a cage, but they're fed and whatever. You could say there's no stress from predators because they're protected or something. And if you open the cage, they invariably run out and disappear because they want to go away from this confinement. They want to be free and wild. And I think we should respect that.
I find it fascinating how we have different priorities. Mine is I'm very strongly motivated by reducing suffering, and I find it fascinating how that in some ways it leads to very different approaches, and in also some other ways we basically have the same approaches, like ending cages for laying hens and slatted furrows for pigs. And the way we go about it may not be the same tactics, but very similar. And then on other aspects, we go totally different directions. So not to find the conclusion here, but just as an observation. And that's probably, that's something I learned recently, that this is maybe the most important question. What is your primary motivation? And then are you more of a pragmatist who wants to get quick, easy wins and reduce as much suffering? Or do you have more of a philosophical background, which the activist that's more looking for pragmatic steps might see as a luxury? For me, it's there's a lot of theory, which I'm not sure if we can ever get there. So I don't zoom out that much. I'm more zoomed into, okay, what do we have now? What's realistic for the next maybe 10, 20, 30 years and focus on that. And I hope to be proven wrong. I hope to we have a world sometime where there's freedom for all animals. I think I have less hopes than you might have. What do you think?
I don't know. We spent 6 years on getting a ban on wild animals in circuses. And there were 16 circuses and, 40 animals that concerned. You would say, why do you spend 6 years on that? And I think, because I don't count suffering, and say this is more suffering, this less, so I do this or that. Firstly, the low fruit approach, but then secondly, the vital ingredient why I find this time spent well spent is that it improves the political status of animals. And this is what, at the end, is animal liberation, that there is complete respect. I want to have laws and regulations and behavior in society that respects animals. And every step in that direction is worth doing. So a wild animal ban is a very important step in order to get eventually to animal liberation or animal rights in our society.
Thank you. Camilla asks, I work in animals used for science, and I'm deeply connected to what you are saying about individual worth. How do you reach people and funders around EA to switch their mindset? Have you done that actually?
No. There's another thing that makes us weird in the eyes of usual people in the movement. We as VGT, we are solely funded by Austrian private donors, small donors. We have about 30,000 donors, and they all spend a little bit of money, and together this is our budget. We have no big donors, we have no foreign donors, we have no project money from the EU or anywhere. And that gives us freedom on the one hand, but not much budget on the other. But no, we so far have not received any money from EA grantees or somebody like that.
Yeah, I thought so. Yeah, I
actually, there is this ACE thing, the animal charity evaluators, and we are pretty bad.
Yeah, they don't love you.
When they look at us, but they do 6 years in circus campaign. Yeah, if you start counting suffering, that might be the case. But I think we have changed the bloody society in Austria very much in the last decade.
Did you, so two very quick questions that we can answer briefly. There's one question about the researcher, the mathematician you mentioned, what's his name, Gödel. There's a book called Gödel, Escher, Bach, which apparently is a fantastic book. I started reading it and I couldn't deal with it. It's too complicated for my simple mind, but apparently it's a fantastic book. So if you want to learn more about Gödel, then that might be one entrance point.
Or read my PhD, which I published as a book, in German only, called Continuity of Consciousness.
Probably a simple read as well. And
the first 6 chapters are mathematics. But when you've got through that,
it gets easier.
And the first time I speak about animals.
Speaking about your publications, your book Widerstand in der Demokratie, will it be translated? Is it translated to English? Will it be ever translated into English?
It's translated to Slovenian, funny enough. Is it not translated to English? If it's not, it's bad, because this is one of the books I sold most, because it is the theory of campaigning, which hopefully people are interested in. It has been written during the trial in order as a defense. And indeed, the judge was sitting there with my book and 500 little colorful papers in it so that she can always find the right page, which probably also let us off eventually, because obviously it argues a bit like Jan today on how you campaign in fair means, like democratically legitimate means. So, if it's not translated, then I should do that, yes. Adapt it to modern thinking and then do it.
Great, great outlook. Thank you very much, Martin. Unfortunately, we're out of time. The man, the myth, the legends. Please give it up for Martin Balluch.